going on. And for a closer look at what's actually going on in the UK, I'm joined by outspoken activist Tommy Robinson, who I'm very excited to have on this show. You can find his documentary called Silenced on X and Rumble, which is, by the way, has been banned almost everywhere else. He's also out with a new best-selling book called Manifesto. Tommy joins us live now. Tommy, thank you so much for joining us. I've been looking forward to speaking with you. You have a massive social media following. You were one of the first people to report on what was happening in the UK and Europe with illegal immigration and the flood of radical Islamists, something mainstream media doesn't want to touch. Your life was turned upside down. Talk about that.
I hope people understand I'm from a town that's 30 miles north of London. When I was born in 1982, there was one mosque. There's now 45 in my small town. White English are a minority. So I can talk from experience of what changes, of how freedom comes under attack and you lose it, of how the government bends and the police bend to the Islamic mob rule. America has had its borders open predominantly for Mexican immigration, but over the last 4 years, Joe Biden has opened your borders and you've had masses and millions of Islamic immigration. From Somalia, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, you need to brace yourself for the cultural change that's coming to the United States of America. That you need to get ready. It's a totally different ballgame than dealing with Hispanic immigration. I started talking about this in 2004. I then formed an organisation come 2009. And I spoke openly about rape gangs, majority Muslim gangs that were targeting young English girls. And I spoke about it because one of my cousins was a victim. When we started talking about this, this was a conspiracy. It was, everyone said we were fear-mongering. It wasn't happening. Come 2015, there was an in-depth investigation in a town called Rotherham that has a 3.7% Muslim population. They identified 1,400 children had been victims of these gangs. The police, the council and the government, all fully aware this was happening. They made a conscious decision to allow the gangs to operate because they didn't want to be deemed as racist. So if you want to understand the power of the political correct millions of Islamic immigration, from Somalia, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, you need to brace yourself for the cultural change that's coming to the United States of America. That you need to get ready. It's a totally different ballgame than dealing with Hispanic immigration. I started talking about this in 2004. I then formed an organisation come 2009. And I spoke openly about rape gangs, majority Muslim gangs that were targeting young English girls. And I spoke about it because one of my cousins was a victim. When we started talking about this, this was a conspiracy. It was, everyone said we were fear-mongering. It wasn't happening. Come 2015, there was an in-depth investigation in a town called Rotherham that has a 3.7% Muslim population. They identified 1,400 children had been victims of these gangs. The police, the council and the government, all fully aware this was happening. They made a conscious decision to allow the gangs to operate because they didn't want to be deemed as racist. So if you want to understand the power of the political correctness and how powerful it is, it paralysed our entire police force from one end of our country to the other, allowing the prostitution, rape, torture and murder of our children across the country because the gangs were Muslim. And no one wanted to upset the mob rule from the Islamic community. And again, so Rotherham has a 3.7% Muslim population. Just so your viewers need to understand the sheer numbers here. You saw riots this summer in the UK where British people stood up and said enough is enough. You need to understand what's gone on over the last 20, 30 years in every town and city and how we've literally, our daughters have been given to them. They've been brought into our country. We're paying it. You know, just in the hotels, they're now being housed in hotels at an astronomical cost across our country in every single town and city. Over a dozen of them have left those hotels and raped English women. In every single town and city, a refugee has raped a woman. Pretty much in our country, they've murdered, they've pillaged their way through our nation. Our entire country is being raped. And when I say that, that may sound alarming. So again, let me quickly give you the statistics. I've done a 5-part series called The Rape of Britain. I'm a journalist, I'm a documentary maker. I made a 5-part series. I started talking about these issues. I was cancelled for 5 years. I only got my account back. So yes, my following's gone, my reach has gone insane when I look at it. But I only got my account back 6 months ago from Elon Musk. Before that, I was censored and deleted off every single social media platform there is. I was deleted. If you mention my name on Facebook, they ban you.
Wow.
That's how much they censored me. I've never been convicted of any crime of hate speech or anything, racism. So then I was reporting on a case in 2017, and I was outside reporting on 30 Muslim men who had been raping young English girls. The judge pulled me in for contempt of court. I went to work. Within 2 hours, he sentenced me to 13 months in prison. 13 months in prison because they put a ban on people talking about this issue. So then I go to jail. He lets all the rapists go home, and then one of the rapists goes to Pakistan. They were more worried about me letting the public know what's going on in these towns and cities. And again, just to give you the statistics and numbers, my 5-part series focused on Telford. Telford is a town in the middle of England. It has a 1.7% Muslim population. The police identified 1,000 English victims. 5 of them have been murdered.
Wow.
3 of them were set fire and burned alive by these gangs. Now, out of that 1,000 children, the police identified over 200 Muslims from the town that had been involved in their rape. I spent 18 months in that town doing an in-depth investigation ourselves with 12 to 18, sat down with all the victims, heard their stories. We built a database of the men involved in the rapes, and then we pieced it together. When the men were named by more than 3 girls that don't know each other, we go after the men in our documentaries. Because out of the police investigation, I identified 200 men. They only prosecuted 11. They know that there's another 189 rapists in that city, but they never prosecuted them. So they've done prosecutions, little token prosecutions in each town and city. But the vast majority of rapists that have been allowed to get away with this have never been prosecuted. In Telford, and I've gone on one here, in Telford only has a 1.7% Muslim population. There's 3,500 Muslims in that town. Once you get rid of the women and the under 16s, you're talking about 1,000 Muslim men in that town. Police identified 200. Our investigation identified 250. An independent inquiry, which has now been done by solicitors, has identified over 300. 20 to 30% of the Muslim men in that town were raping and torturing our daughters for 30 years with full knowledge of the police.
I mean, this is so scary as you're saying this.
Now, when I looked at the demographics and the change in Manchester, over a 10-year period, there were 25,000 Muslims. 10 years later, there were 50,000. 10 years later, there were 100,000. You see how this increase happens so quick, so fast, in one generation. Now, we in the UK have 40,000 British Muslims on a terror watch list. 4 times as many Muslims went to fight for ISIS than have ever joined the British military. We have a ticking time bomb, and that number increases every single year. That's even if we close the borders, we can't deal with this problem. It's so large. And certain crimes are outside of the government being able to deal with them. Female genital mutilation. We have 55,000 British girls that are Muslim who have had their genitals cut off. That carries a 14-year sentence. Do you know how many people have been in prison for it? We've had that law for 20 years to lock people up. Only this year was the first prosecution. Why? Because if they prosecuted the parents for doing this, for mutilating their children, and the reason that they do it is because a good woman is not meant to enjoy sex. She's just there to have a baby. But these are British girls in Britain, and they're having their genitals mutilated. The reason why they don't prosecute them, because if they prosecuted the 2 parents, there wouldn't be one single prison place left. Just off that one crime. Just off that one crime. So certain crimes, they turn a blind eye to, like the rape of our entire generation of our daughters. The amount of men, they can't lock them up. The trials cost so much. There's so many. And that's before you add into it terrorism. We have, out of that 40,000 terrorists, 3,000 are on a monitor watch list where they're monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That costs £9 billion a year. £9 billion a year. The cost to the economy, the drain on society from open border mass immigration from countries like Pakistan. Pakistani males make up 3% of the British population. Birth defects, because 76% of them are marrying their cousins. Birth defects, 3% is responsible for 33%. All of these costs that come into the problems that are imported into our nation. 99% of Afghanis in Afghanistan want Sharia law. We keep welcoming them in. They don't leave these intolerant, misogynistic, vile practices in Afghanistan.
And it's our democracy that they're able to kind of do that because the United States and the UK is a democracy. But